sponsored by the LaHood Norton Law Group. And now, your objection sustained. Your hosts, Karen Klaus and former Bexar County District Attorney, Nico LaHood.
1200 WOAI, this is Sidebar with former Bexar County DA Nico LaHood, trial lawyer, managing partner of LaHood Norton Law Group, and George Araujo, scholar, former chemist, and pharmaceutical research director. Where's Nico?
Is Nico in the house?
I guess
Elvis is in the house.
Hi, Nico. Welcome. Hey, glad you
help yourself.
No, we're on the air, and we're just starting right now, but no problem. Today, our topics are going to include, didn't the President Trump have something going on this week? I don't know. Did he? Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's going to be a good discussion. I mean,
he's a little busy.
We need to talk about this. I mean, it did not, I don't think anything surprised anybody. Nothing surprised anybody of what... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Nothing surprised anybody about what was or wasn't in that indictment. I think it needs to be discussed. There's a lot of things that need to be analyzed. I mean, a number of things that need to be analyzed about the indictment and what it lacks and kind of the legal ramifications for that. And then, of course, the political ramifications. I mean, everyone has their opinion about whether this helps Trump, whether this hurts Trump. How do his opponents respond to this? To what opponents actually, how do they use this or not use this, and how the voting bloc is going to deal with this, and then, of course, how it works, how it plays out in the general. So it's a lot to discuss on that.
Well, and there is a lot to discuss because I keep on hearing about, oh, well, don't worry, this doesn't have anything to do with Georgia. And I'm like, what's going on in Georgia? And I don't understand. I mean, there's more to come, but they're holding back because it seems right now that the charges are kind of weak.
I mean, Georgia has to deal with a conversation from I haven't dug into that one as much as I've dug into this one, but that one deals with a conversation that was, from my understanding, very public conversation. I mean, people were on the call, lawyers were on the call.
That's true. Between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger, who was the Secretary of State.
And other people were on the conversation, too. Yeah. So this was not some private conversation in a closet saying, Trump up, no pun intended, some votes for me. So that's a different analysis, but many legal experts that have looked at this a lot deeper than I have believe it's just as weak as this one, or maybe not as weak, but weak.
Right. And then this week, it's so odd, but to me, it's so hurtful. And some people might think it's funny, weird. And that's Bud Light and Nike. They're both of their decisions to, I guess, hire a trans woman, which is a man, to endorse their companies.
Yeah, there's nothing funny about this to me.
No.
I think people are mistaken when they get snarky about it. I understand there's jokes, whatever, back and forth, but this is not funny to me. I mean, when you look at where this is going, and what we've been talking about this for a long time, and the ramifications on this, and how that movement per se is treating other people. I mean, it's gotten violent. I mean, you're talking about people that have been violent, and the vitriol and the conversations and what they're expecting and how they want people to act or react or whatever is horrible. I mean, you look at that swimmer that was supposed to speak at what school she was going to speak on about women's rights and women in sports, and then she was attacked in the hallway and they're rushing her off. You don't rush anybody off from a mob. You have a righteous mob that deals with an unrighteous mob. That's my opinion legally. I mean, when you have law enforcement has to keep order. Now, maybe they weren't ready for it. Maybe they didn't have the staff, or I get all that. But my point is, when you kowtown around to illegal behavior, well, they're going to keep doing it because you're just reinforcing bad behavior. I want to know if anybody was arrested in that incident because allegedly the young lady, the swimmer, and I can't think of her name. I remembered her name the other day.
Her name is Riley Gaines.
That's it. Thank you. Allegedly, she was assaulted. Well, if she was assaulted, the person that allegedly committed that assault needs to be arrested and face accusations like anybody else, and they deserve due process. They're presumed innocent. Maybe it was unintentional. I don't know what the defense would be, but I'm just saying that there needs to be order. This is not order.
Well, let's go to her Twitter account real quick. The prisoners, I'm quoting, the prisoners are running the asylum at San Francisco State University. I was ambushed and physically hit twice by a man, and she provides video. This is proof that women need sex-protected spaces. Still only further assures me I'm doing something right. When they want you silent, speak louder. And then there's a series of video clips showing this incident.
The crowd.
Indeed, yeah. So she's a 12-time All-American swimmer, and she's been kind of out there on an island, Nico, publicly objecting to Bill Thomas, a.k.a. Leah Thomas, whom she competed against at the University of Pennsylvania.
Look, we need it. We cannot stop talking about this. I mean, we've been talking about it, but and you remember, Karen and George. I mean, I kept back then. This really bothered me. We're going to talk about that again. Yes, I know where this goes. We saw where this was going. I mean, we talk about women. I don't know where the women advocacy groups are. Women are fearfully and wonderfully made. They need to be defended. Womanhood is beautiful. Womanhood is created by God and should be celebrated. Manhood should be celebrated. I can't stand that term toxic masculinity. There's nothing toxic about true biblical masculinity. That's something else. If you're talking about toxic masculinity, that's not masculinity. That's a distortion. And you never judge an ideology by its abuse, as we say, right? And so that's something separate. But womanhood needs to be advocated and defended for sure. And so that's not happening. And I don't know where people are losing their minds, because this is very simple. Other people may make it not easy. This is a simple issue. There are two genders. That's it. That's not controversial. This is something that the hypocrisy of this administration. I mean, we've brought this up last week and the weekend before, not last week, the week before maybe, or whenever we brought it up, when President Biden, then Senator Biden, was just talking about anything to deal with man and woman and relationships. And this wouldn't have been even tolerated by the old Biden or Obama or Hillary or anybody else in the past. So what's going on? And you have to think about the underlying movement and what their goal is. And so this needs to be discussed. Parents need to be bold. Legal, of course, be legal, work within the confines, let your voice be heard, let the schools know, you have to speak up. You cannot be silent.
Nico repeatedly brings this up, and he needs to continue to bring it up. But there's a part of me that says that it doesn't matter, and that's what frustrates me the most, that it bothers me that I'm thinking that. But that's where we are today. So if you tell a Democrat today, a politician, and you actually show him video of what he said 5 or 6, 7 years ago, made a statement maybe that was diametrically opposed to what he's saying right now, people should know that they see it as a badge of honor, okay? In a normal society, in a functioning society where hypocrisy matters, you're like, wow, that's right. Geez, I've been caught. Maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. That's not what's going on here. If you're pursuing power, it doesn't matter. So hypocrisy is a tool. It's an asset.
But then I want to make them admit. I want to make them admit, and then I would cross-examine them and say, so tell me, you said this, and you advocated this. You say this now, advocate this now. So something's changed. Your reasoning for changing doesn't make any logical sense. So by definition, you're a hypocrite or an opportunist,
exactly right.
Correct?
And I
would not let
Thank you.
off.
That's exactly where the argument needs to go then. You can't just stop and say, look how hypocritical you were. You need to actually look forward and say, if you were lying then it's conceivable that you're lying now, and therefore, why the hell should I listen to anything that you say? Exactly right.
But this never used to be a partisan issue. I know a lot of people that advocate Democrat voting and things like that do not support this. This is not something that I think is collectively people as a whole want to take on. I mean, womanhood should be celebrated. I mean, think about all the people out there that have daughters that are going to miss out on. We talked about this a long time ago, Karen, about scholarships. I mean, now this Division I recognition or whatever it is, and money opportunities and trophies and winning tournaments and the acknowledgement that they deserve for hard work. I mean, and then they have to change together. I mean, she's talking about them having to change together. I mean, look now. If transgender people want to compete in sports, then start a transgender league. Then can compete. Do that. I mean, we have to make sure. And then now there's another discussion. I'm sure you didn't want to go here, Karen. Sorry, but and then what about Title IX? Now what do we do? Now Now the president is trying to make this an issue where a trans woman is a woman and trans rights. Think about the terms. Trans rights are human rights. That's not the same. Human rights are human rights. Trans advocacy is something separate. And a trans woman is not a woman. That is not controversial. A trans woman is not a woman. If a trans woman, and I get confused, and I'm not being snarky. I'm not trying to be sarcastic.
Very confusing.
But if a biological man presents as a woman and says to the doctor, walks into a doctor's office and says, "Doctor, I have a problem. What's wrong with you? I can't get pregnant. Help me." What is the doctor going to say? Is the doctor going to say, "There's something wrong with you. You should be able to get pregnant"? A doctor, unless they should turn in their license, will say, "I'm sorry, you cannot get pregnant. Whatever you want me to tell you, whatever pronoun you want me to say that you put on your chart, I'll do it because I'm your doctor," whatever. If they want to be respectful, that's their deal. That's between them and the patient. But you cannot get pregnant. Well, why, doctor? Because you don't have certain parts. Biologically, it is not natural for you to be pregnant. You can't get pregnant. That's not mean. That's not partisan. That's not Republican or Democrat, or at least it shouldn't be. That's just biology. So it's ironic that all the science deniers, all the people that say you're a science denier, climate change and all this other stuff are denying science. This has nothing to do with politics. And we need to take it out of the realm of politics and keep it in the world of science and logic. And that's where I think people need to talk this through.
Go ahead. I mean, there are so many parts to all of this that it's just like, it's unnerving to me.
But the insanity continues. So Nico presented, a functioning, rational world, which is what we all need to be fighting for. But we've mentioned in here, and I'm going to keep mentioning, that they've institutionalized this thinking, even in the American Medical Association. In a North Carolina federal court, there was a testimony by Dr. Deanna Atkins, and here's what she stated. From a medical perspective, that by the way, is not part of the quote, that's just me. From a medical perspective, the appropriate determinant of sex is gender identity. As you say, Nico, let that sink in. She's the director of the Duke Center.
Well, what does that mean? Make sure they understand what that means. I want to make sure people understand.
Oh, no, it gets better. She's the director for the Duke Center for Child and Adolescent Gender Care. She argues that gender identity is not only the preferred basis for determining sex, but it's, quote, the only medically supported determinant of sex. So every other method that argues that biological sex is the only valid determinant or definition of sex is not scientifically grounded. This is the turning of science on its head to suit a political narrative. Think about that for a moment. So she defines gender identity, and she says, quote, it is a person's inner sense of belonging to a particular gender, such as male or female. And the shorthand for that is feelings. If you happen to feel that you're a male, if you happen to feel that you're a female, that is the basis then from which we can then make an objective scientific assessment.
So your feelings equal objective analysis. And then think about, what if I feel like I'm 65 exactly. and I want the government, the same government that's advocating this, government, I feel 65, I really do, and I identify as a 65-year-old, pay me my Social Security.
There is no difference, is there? There's no difference. What kills me is, I don't have headphones. I guess we're going to break. We will be right back with more Sidebar.
With reputations as respected high-level...
This is Sidebar. You can always go to sidebartv.com to find us on social media platforms like Facebook. And please remember that there's all kinds of things that you can look at when it comes to sidebartv.com. You can be a contributor, a sponsor. Oh, there's my headphones. Thank you. And remember, after the show also, we will do a Facebook Live for at least 30 minutes. Let's go back to what you're talking about, that definition that you're talking about.
And George is going to unpack it for us, Karen, because that definition matters, because I'm going to tell you two things. So age. Let's think about age. So if the example, and George will unpack and dissect, such as male and female. So now we're talking about gender or sex, which are synonymous, but whatever, gender and sex. Now age. So someone feels like they're 70. I feel like I'm 65. I got a 12-year-old that says, well, I feel like I'm 18 or 16, so I want to drive. I feel like I'm 21, so I want to buy a firearm. I feel like I'm 17, so I want to consent to sex. Well, I feel like I'm 14. I want to have sex with a 15-year-old too. I feel like you're 40. But I feel and I identify as like I'm a 16-year-old. So under Texas law, within the 3-year window, if I'm 16, I can have sex with 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and 16-year-olds. But I feel like I identified, and my feelings are objectively valid. And so we're going to apply my feelings to an objective standard, which makes it not objective, by the way. See, this is why definitions matter, Karen. Mm-hmm. This is called critical thinking. We have to reason through this and the implications of this. Like, as we say, how does it play out? And so where does it end? And the answer is, and George is going to get real technical with this, it doesn't end. And this is why this is important, these discussions.
I just think that if you, as you use the word unpack, what she's saying, she's saying not just a male or female. She's saying that it's either male or female, but it uses such as male or female. So it's not just male or female. It can be whatever it is you want it to be. So this physician who should bring clarity to this is doing the opposite. Lots of ambiguity. And what she's actually doing is she's affirming a contradiction at the heart of this philosophy. And see, this is the problem. You can't engage rationally with these individuals, and there can't be healing. There's no light at the end of the tunnel if you can't talk rationally and truthfully.
Right.
So here's what they're saying. They're saying that truth is whatever it is that you want it to be.
Correct.
Right? So an objective, demonstrably determinable fact like biological sex, which is innate and immutable, means it can't change. It is not just a function of DNA, but it's also, it's not just DNA. It actually goes down to the very molecules and organs of your body. They're asking you to deny all of that. But listen to the contradiction. Truth is relative. Truth is whatever it is that you want it to be. It's ultimately subjectified. But at the same time, Nico, they argue that the real person is trapped down deep inside. So there is no real person if you argue the truth is subjective. There is no quote unquote real. Real is a function of however it is that you feel. And this is bad enough when you have a patient, when you have a person who's struggling with this. And I want to stop here and say, these are people who are legitimately suffering. They really are. Yeah. Gender dysphoric people, imagine being so alienated, so detached from your biological sex that you actually want to remove your own body parts. This is a severe mental illness. These people are hurting deeply, and they need compassion and love, and they need competent medical care. But instead, you have a cynical, evil, destructive, disgusting political movement that is exploiting their illness for political gain. And so these people are out there. They're being pawns. They're being used. And at some point, when the peak of power is reached, Nico, what's going to happen is they're going to be the first to be tossed overboard. That's the horror of all this.
You need to explain that. What do you mean?
He's being opportunistic. He's saying they're going to use you, drain you for whatever we can get from you, and then dump you out. And so whether it's being exploited, I think there's an argument or at least a conversation that needs to be had logically and objectively on whether it's being created, not just exploited. I mean, again, I bring up Bill Maher a lot because I like when he brings things up. And we talked about this, I think, weeks ago. This is not a recent clip, but he was talking about how every X amount of years, this transgender identification has been doubling in our young people. He makes the joke by 2054, half of us, we're all going to be transgender or gay or whatever he says. I mean, he's a comedian, so he's trying to be funny. But what I'm saying is he actually dissects, are we creating this own price? He's asking the question. I mean, it's a legitimate conversation. It doesn't make sense okay, if X amount of people identified this way, whatever years ago, and I'm saying that because I don't remember the numbers and then
I get what you're saying.
X amount of years later, it's doubled. So many years later, it's doubled. So many years later, it's doubled. What's going on? I mean, then now the argument's going to be, well, they always felt that way. Not necessarily, because then you would think that you'd have a bunch of Jenners out there, Bruce Jenners, Caitlyn Jenner, whatever you want to say. You'd have a bunch of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s saying, hey, I want to transition now. If that was truly the case, just like when they talk about autism, well, autism's 1 in 34. Exactly. It's always been it used to be 1 in 10,000 or so back in the 80s. What do you mean 1 in 34? Well, it's always been 1 in 34. We just identify it better. Fine. Well, then there better be 50, 60, and 70-year-old adult people on the spectrum of autism in some village somewhere that nobody knows about, and they're not. They're not 1 in 34 adult autistic people today. So I use that as an example, Karen.
I think that's really well. I think that's really well stated. Imagine when you have a mental illness and you put all kinds of political inertia and tons of cash behind it. Why is anyone surprised when you institutionalize pushing it? Why is anyone surprised that the number of occurrences tend to increase over time? This isn't, it's not rocket science. I want to go back to a thought that I think is important here, because this ties to violence, which is really where you started this conversation. Because ultimately, think about it. Ann Haas and her research group presented at the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law in 2014. And that's where she stated during that discussion that 41% of individuals who are struggling with transgender impulses are about 41% are going to attempt to commit suicide. It's about 9 times higher than their peers. And if you've actually had this so-called gender reassignment surgery, you're going to be 19 times more likely to commit suicide.
This is her data.
Yeah, this is a combination of Ann Haas at UCLA in 2014 and a researcher by the name of Cecilia Dene, Dhejne, who's a Swedish researcher. She actually has the most robust study, Nico, that looks at what happens over time. In fact, we have 30 years worth of data in this study out of Sweden that looks at these kinds of outcomes. And you look at that suicide rates, which, as I mentioned, are through the roof, 19 times more likely. And by the way, I know the argument, you always bring it up because I know it's what they're saying. The argument is, well, it's because they're not
accepted.
Exactly. Right. And you have parents and peers. The reason why that is debunked in that very study, this is important. I want people to listen carefully to what I'm going to say, is because that environment is accounted for as a confounding factor in the study. In other words, it's done in Sweden. It's statistically significant. It's done over long periods of time, and Sweden as a culture is perhaps the most strongly supportive of transgender rights.
Yeah. And
so that background noise is accounted for in the data. And so the question is, okay, so it's not that. Well, what is it? Well, what it is that you are fundamentally unmaking the individual from the inside. That's what the illness does. You're constantly alienated from who you are. And then you have people, you have money, you have politics. Now you have medical institutions that are pushing you along, encouraging the illness. What could go wrong?
Well, and think about what you're doing societally, because then you're almost forcing the people that do not support that ideology, because it's being shoved down people's throat, to shove back. And then you get a Chris Rock, shooting beer cans because he's trying to tell Bush to screw off.
Kid Rock.
Kid Rock. So what did I say?
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. Oh, sorry. He's the one that got slapped by Will Smith, right?
Yeah.
That's the one that everybody agrees is morally reprehensible.
Right.
So that's right. Sorry. Kid Rock. One of the rocks. And it was not the Rock, the wrestler.
The other, not
There's
that
too
one
many
either.
rocks out there. So Kid Rock. So he's pushing back boldly, and he's saying, F you, and he flips off this and then shoot this. This is what I think about it. So you're almost creating that pushback because it's being shoved so much. It's being shoved in your face. It's everywhere. It's like, man, can you just do your advocacy? Look, I believe in a country that if you want to make that advocacy point, make it. If you want to push that and make that point with adults, make it. Then allow the counter argument, win on the facts, have a better argument, make it logically consistent and contradictory, and then persuade people. Remember, we said this a long time ago. There's 2 ways to run a country, Karen, either by persuasion or by force. The founding fathers of this country chose to run this country by persuasion. We have a constitutional republic. We have representative government. We have elections. We have debates. We have advocacy. We have campaigning, and then you vote. And you're governed by the consent of the people. Consent meaning someone persuaded you to agree. That's what consent means. It's not forcing. We're getting into a country where it's by force. And then the problem with that, and what I pray against in this country, and why we're so passionate about this, is the only way to stop forceful government is to have force back. And that's what I don't want. I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that for my grandkids, and I don't want this for this country.
Boy, that language is loaded in the Declaration, isn't it? And it's loaded. It's very deliberate that to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. and who gets to decide, the just factor thereof. It's the governed. We have a moral responsibility to hold our government accountable. I don't know if listeners, I can't see what you guys are saying, but I want to point out that the research that I had mentioned earlier, you can look it up. DHEJNE is in the Public Library of Science. It's from February 2011, Volume 6, Issue 2. And if you're looking for the electronic article, I believe it's E16885. It is the most robust study on this. And read the abstract. It's fairly intuitive to read. I mean, there should be no doubt about it.
When you said earlier, the truth can be I don't know what quote it was from. The truth can be whatever you want it to be when it comes to a person's sex. But I look at that truth and I'm unnerved because the only thing that everybody's talking about is Kid Rock. But if you look at Kid Rock, he has like an assault-style rifle, and he's shooting up a bunch of, Bud Light. He's wearing a MAGA cap backwards. And on the other hand, we have that, is Dylan Mulvaney. He's a TikTok star, social media star, and he is the ultimate stereotype of a woman. Like, it's almost as if it's like the Lucille Ball crazy, girl that's, buying dresses and crying, and it's the opposite.
That's not a woman. That's not necessarily a woman to be.
But it's the opposite extreme.
Like a stereotype.
That is like a cartoon. But that's what we see on the internet, and so both sides are extremes. I get that. So people think that the people that are against this transgender person that's on the Bud Light can is the one side, and then Kid Rock is on the other side. They're both sides are extreme.
Yeah, to me, it's not about the Dylan Mulvaney. It's not about that person. It's about the ideology. Just like it's not about Trump.
I know, but that person is an actor. Why doesn't anybody see that?
Well, because they don't want. I think a lot of people do, but they're afraid to. I mean, do you think? I mean, Anheuser-Busch or whatever, and then Nike for them to do this. I mean, think about what you're doing. What you're forcing. You're forcing conversations onto kids that they shouldn't have. You're forcing sexual conversation. I have friends of mine brought this up this week. Like, man, I had to ask my 9-year-old. I just had to ask. Do you know what transgender means? Well, yeah, Dad, it means this. Well, she didn't know what it meant. She just believed that, and what she was describing was a tomboy in my day.
Yeah.
Where a little girl that's rough and tough and tumbly, and because women can be tough, and they should be, by the way. We talked about that last time. But that's a tomboy. I grew up around a bunch of tomboys. They grew up and they're feminine, strong, intellectual, beautiful women. Mm-hmm. So what? So they're two different things.
But that doesn't mean that you're anti-trans. It just, the people that are complaining, doesn't it just mean you're pro-woman and that you don't
I'm pro-truth. I'm pro-truth. And women are women and men are men. And we need to talk about how this has played out, because when Vice President Harris went to Nashville, she wanted to go there for these, and I know this is not one of your topics, maybe it is, maybe it's not, wanted to go there for these elected officials that were removed, and has no plans, and didn't meet with the Nashville families of these little precious children that were murdered.
We got to continue with this topic. It's all coming up next on Sidebar. sidebartv.com, and join us for the after show, Facebook Live, sidebartv.com. Let's continue, George, talking about this. There are so many facets to this. We're talking about Bud Light, and yes, we're talking about Kid Rock, but we're also talking about some violence that happened. And the thing that we are not talking about that you mentioned during the break is, are there people that did the transition that are now sorry they did the transition? How come we're not hearing anything about that?
Yeah, you and Nico and I were just kind of beating that around casually, but it is true. We're starting to see as this, again, as this political machine continues to push for more and more so-called transgender rights. And we're seeing alongside that a lot of reports of detransitioning, individuals who are speaking out and saying, this is a ruse. You guys you're making this sound like this is this wonderful thing, this wonderful experiment in self-actualization when it's nothing of the sort. And so I was mentioning to you an example of Helena Kirshner, Kerschner, a 23-year-old, and she caught my eye. She was on an interview, I think, with Tucker Carlson, Nico, and she was saying how this is presented as X, but in reality, it's Y. Taking cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and going through this so-called detransitioning. This so-called transitioning is not what it's made out to be. It's not something you just undergo physically, but she says you go through traumatic psychological experiences and a lot of emotional destabilization, and it's perpetual. It doesn't stop. And so there's an article, I want to refer people to it because we simply don't have time to go through all the examples. I was simply pointing out that there's a movement right now. It feels like a movement. There's a lot of people that are speaking out about detransitioning because they're saying this is a ruse. This was an experiment, really, in personal and emotional devastation. There's an article at Town Hall that's written by Madeline Leesman, Leesman. Former detransitioner has retransitioned and is pushing back against the anti-trans movement. So this is the opposite, interestingly enough. So
I want to make sure we get that. So she transitioned from a female to whatever, she did the procedure to, then back, and now back to.
Right.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is that you have individuals who make a decision because they think it's a good idea and they're encouraged. Then they realize it's a mistake because and then they speak out. And then there's a political machine that pushes back on that. So now they transition back. And so this is my point. We're using these people as political pawns. Read the article because Madeline Leesman goes into the details of various individuals who are actually speaking out against the trans movement and explaining the political dynamics behind it, and how dangerous this is, frankly, to the Republic and to any sane, stable society. This is why I think you said at the top of the hour, we have to keep talking about it because innocent people are being exploited. And there's something nefarious at its root here. They're turning this into a militaristic movement. It's becoming violent.
But you can influence young people. When you have these discussions, and we've had them in the past on different topics about racism and hatred and all this other thing. A child is not born racist, and that's why we that CRT discussions we've had over and over again. I mean, a child is taught to hate. I mean, you see people, you hear the old stories of the old KKK development and how they were taught at a very young age to hate, to love, to whatever. I mean, you're nurturing a child. It's Proverbs 22, right? Start a child up in the way they will go, and when they get older, they will not depart from it, right? Well, you can do that with anything. And if you start confusing children and you're not telling them the truth, biological, logical, morally, whatever, you're starting to set this child in motion as an adult. And you're normalizing things. And you talk about it's indoctrination. We throw that word around, but it truly is. I mean, one of the comments that was made by one of these very, very dishonest advocacy groups was saying, well, this is what you Christians get on the Nashville shooting for indoctrinating these kids young. What do you mean indoctrinating these kids young? So it's a battle of indoctrinations, and unless I'm pushing your indoctrination, then I'm the wrong person. There's that definition of moral, right? Look, a compliment is a judgment. If I say, Karen, you did a very good job yesterday, when's the last time you're going to tell, who the hell are you to judge me, Nico? How dare you judge me? Well, I'm complimenting you. Yeah, but how dare you judge me? compliment me? Who the hell do you think you are? I mean, compliments are judgments. Support is judgment. When you support a movement, you're making a judgment. Everybody makes judgments.
Yeah.
Now, how you treat that judgment, how you relay that judgment, and ironically, or maybe not, I mean, biblically, scripture, it says the righteous person, the righteous man assesses, judges all things. Well, but then we're using certain standards. What compass are you using? When we talk about moral compass and you think about how's a compass used, you think to yourself, okay, I'm lost. In the old history, you had a compass. Where's north? So you didn't know where you're at. You looked at your compass to face you north so you knew how to get home eventually. Because when you don't know what's going on, you use a compass. You talk to any pilot. I have many friends that are pilots. They tell the pilots, do not trust your feelings. You trust your instruments. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing is we're changing that around. Do we take this ideology and say, hey, pilots, you know what? Just trust your feelings. Don't worry about your instruments. No, you have to look at objective standards. I have my instruments. What are the objective instruments? That's what I call the moral compass of this society. And it was always a Judeo one. Doesn't mean you have to evangelize, but this is even outside of that, Karen. This is just biology 101, right? And I want to bring this up later. We don't have to do it now. But because I want to talk about this weekend and Easter weekend and resurrections. I want to talk about that on the way out. Georgia, say something. Sorry.
I was just going to say that all this is being purposely channeled. That's the problem. So we mentioned the 19 times greater proclivity of this population to die of suicide relative to their peers. Okay, so this is being channeled. It's being channeled into anger.
Yeah.
It's being channeled into a militant movement. I would argue that this is far more dangerous than what's being done with the Black Lives Matter. Another lie, a Black Lives Matter movement. Another lie that there's this systemic white against black racism throughout the country, and it's suffused the country. Look at the damage and the violence that came out of that lie, the Antifa lie. This is a more sinister lie because that is a lie. The other two are lies based on political issues. This is a lie that is ontological at its core, meaning it lies about a fundamental reality. It's that much more sinister and that much more cynical. I mean, this is really this regime, and I use the word deliberately. This regime is depraved at its core. You have a White House press secretary who can barely construct an English sentence. She is incompetent by an innumerable number of standards. But she sits up there and she blatantly lies about this. She disregards, as Nico said, the murder of innocent children and then props up these injustices that are being done by a delusional crowd that's not getting any help. And they sit there and they celebrate that and they push it every chance they get. I mean, how unbelievably morally detached as a human being do you need to be? This is what's going on. And so getting back to the Declaration of Independence, it comes back to you, the listener, every American citizen. We have a lot of power at our disposal, but we have to channel it too. I mean, we really have to get involved where this is happening at the local schools. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Start with the teacher. If that doesn't work, go to the principal. If that doesn't work, go to the superintendent. If that doesn't work, go to the governing school board over that superintendent. If that doesn't work, then write a letter to the editor at a local newspaper. Start a podcast. There's so much that you can do today.
Start parent groups.
Start parent groups. Great advice.
Look, we didn't get here overnight. I mean, we've got to really have an assessment about where this country's going, and that's not hyperbolic. That's not anything. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just being practical. I've seen how this plays out. You see it play out in the justice system every day, or I do, and then most people could read about it or whatever. And you see the testing of ideas and how it plays out in the social experiment called the justice system. Violence is up, disrespect is up, our schools are in shambles.
Yes.
I mean, there's situations where there's 9 fights here and 2 mosh pits there, and there's drugs and there's sex and this and that, and then these phones and the messaging and the messages that's going around and the information that the children are being exposed to, but the ideology people are, and then there's no compass. We don't have a compass. Our instruments are off. I mean, if we're looking at our pilot example, our instruments are off. And we're saying, forget your instruments, go by your feelings, And then you do that and you have disaster because you have a bunch of plane crashes. And, we know that's what a lot of people believe John F. K. Jr.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, that he didn't understand his instruments, and he was in clouds and this, and your equilibrium, all kinds of things that pilot friends of mine have told me. But we have to have that discussion. And that's why I prop up, in Bill Maher, someone like Bill Maher, a Russell Brand, a Dave Rubin, people that used to lean left or would have been labeled, quote unquote, as left, even a Joe Rogan, when they're saying, wait a minute, we got to have some parameters, guys. Let's passionately disagree about A, B, C, and D, but E and F and G, this is something that nobody disagreed on. Can we just have some rules of engagement here? And that's the discussion we need to have. We have to come back to that, and we have to have I think the country and the church needs to be part of this. It needs to have a discussion about what are our instruments? What are we going to teach children? What's going on? Where does play this out, as we always say? Where does this go? Look where we're at today in 2023. Think about just Y2K. I remember everyone thought the world was going to end and everything was over and all this other crap. Just think of that. Think of just 2010. Just think of 2015, 8 years removed. I'm not trying to discourage people. I'm encouraged because I think more people are waking up. But if you wake up without courage, then it's still going to be a disaster. So you have to have courage to match your logic.
But what do you say then to the woman, Riley Gaines, who had the courage and now was assaulted? I think people think that they're going to be in that position too. We are going to take a break, and we will have more of Sidebar coming up next. WOAI. This is Sidebar. Remember, after the show, you can join us on Facebook Live. You can find the link by going to sidebartv.com. Please share that and tell people, because there are, I guess, more extensive conversations about the things that we've talked about on the show, and sometimes we bring up new topics. So we were talking about...
Yeah, surprises. We have surprises for people.
I would say. We're talking a little bit about, or wrapping up the
assaultive. I think George wanted to bring up this assaultive mindset in our society that if we don't agree with you now, it's okay. So it's not okay for Will Smith to slap Chris Rock, but it's okay to slap this young lady because she's a transphobe.
And she's speaking up.
But it's our instruments are off. This is my point. Our instruments are off. We don't even know where we're going by feelings, and there's no consistency. We used to have a consistency in our society where everyone had a bedrock of agreement. We had rules of engagement on truth, on basic things that, okay, we'll argue about these. We're not going to argue about this stuff. And I think that transitions, Karen, into this indictment on President Trump.
Oh, big time.
I mean, there's a lot of things that people are concerned about. I think this played out exactly the way people thought it was going to play out. A lot of commentators and legal experts were talking about this indictment, and the statement of facts on the indictment are embarrassing. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I know a lot of people want to be condescending, and the lawyers are trying to do what they're doing, whatever. I mean, this is alarming. It's alarming that it could get to this point. It's alarming that people in power, that the president of the United States is truly not pushing back and say something. I mean, you can disagree with someone, but this is not the way it's supposed to be. They're kind of hands off, whatever, and you got certain people just giddy about this. But then you even have people like John Bolton, who's I have very strong opinions against him. But even a John Bolton, Andy McCabe, and a Van Jones are saying, man, this is a lot worse than I thought it was going to be, in the sense of how weak it is. not how bad it is against Trump, about how weak legally of a case this is. You have issues of lack of notice. These are constitutional arguments that constitutionally, if we're going to uphold any remnants of this justice system, you have to have notice, manner and means of how you committed a crime. Forget about the legal gymnastics that we talked about last week, about how you have a alleged misdemeanor filing report tacked on to a federal violation, FEC, Federal Elections Commission violation, potentially that the DOJ rejected, the FEC rejected, and then you kind of mix it together to elevate it to a felony under New York law so the statute of limitations could be expanded and it could reach out this. I mean, forget about that. Then you have double jeopardy issues. If you're not given proper notice, and that's fundamental fair play, due process, it's protected by the Constitution, knowing exactly what the government is bringing against you. Well, then technically, let's say you're acquitted or this gets dismissed. Well, I didn't know. Now you're bringing the same charge in another different creative way over here. So there's double jeopardy issues. There's notice issues. There's lack of notice issues. I mean, this is just a legally insufficient, factually insufficient indictment. That's a formal charge. The statement of fact, and Patrick was telling me this, it has like typos in it. This is a statement of fact within the indictment. I mean, this is just, it's really, and it's a joke. It's really it's shameful. It's sad because I don't want this happening to Biden. I don't want this happening to Clinton, Obama, Bush, anybody. Look, if you're going to charge a former president, they're not above the law. We've talked about that before. I get it. It better be a strong, legitimate case. But guess what? They're not. They're not below the law either, Karen. They're not below the law. And Lady Justice wears a blindfold for a reason. And right now, she either has one eye open or she's wearing a mesh blindfold. And that's not the way it should be in our justice system. It's a scary proposition, and people need to wake up.
And this is going to happen in Manhattan. So Dershowitz has, what has he said recently? He said there's no way he's going to get a fair trial there. You're not going to have an acquittal in Manhattan. If it happens in Manhattan, he will be acquitted on appeal. Now, why is that? The Manhattan makeup is really stunning. So Trump, if you look at it electorally, it's about 10% to 90% in terms of Trump to Biden supporters. Trump had suggested a movement of venue to Staten Island.
Yeah.
There, it's more like 52% Trump, 47% Biden. We're dealing with, what's this guy's name? Juan Manuel Merchan. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this guy is that he's not an elected judge. He was appointed by Michael Bloomberg. So judges in New York are elected, and I think Dershowitz was saying that, I mean, if this gets before a federal judge, they have lifetime appointments. Trump will get much more of a fair hearing there, and he thinks ultimately he'll be acquitted on the very issues that you just mentioned. In fact, you practically verbatim described the issues that he raised.
He wrote a book on it. Dershowitz wrote a book on this.
Yeah,
he better know.
I still have his Reversal of Fortune. That's where he became famous on that case. But I thought it was a fascinating book. The guy really is amazing. I love he's really he wants to be fair and have a sort of a salient judgment of issues, even though he's a liberal guy by his own admission. But I think that's my concern right now, that you're going to end up with a jury of individuals who have already predisposed to throwing the
But is that a big surprise?
It's not. But this gets back to a mindset that Alvin Bragg is not alone on. The former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, stated that that's okay, Trump, no one is above the law. I mean, really, talk about hypocrisy.
Right, kidding.
So Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton seem to be above the law. Andrew McCabe, who lied before Congress, seems to be above the law. Or Dennis
Quaid, I get things
Who else? Come on, I'm on a roll
Chris
here.
Rock.
James Clapper, John Brennan. I mean, give me a break. It depends on which party you're in. That's what Americans are seeing, this two-tier justice. It's blatant in front of us, and that's the great loss and the great tragedy here. There is a two-tier justice. But the idea that there's this alignment between Bragg and Pelosi, the idea that you actually go to trials to prove your innocence, which is a reversal of the American system of justice. You are innocent until proven guilty.
Unless proven guilty, I would like to say. Until means
Excellent.
like it kind of comes across
innocent.
like it's a foregone conclusion.
Unless you're Trump.
Unless proven guilty.
Stated by a true lawyer versus an armchair lawyer.
Every time President Trump brings up he wants a change of venue, or the judge is somehow connected to the Biden campaign, or the judge's daughter worked for the Biden campaign.
Those are documented things. That this judge has all kinds of publicly available examples of conflicts of interest here. No sane judge would ever have the cojones to actually sit in front of people with that kind of background. A real judge would probably dismiss this on lack of merit. Is that not the case?
Yes, but theoretically, we'll see. They file a motion to quash the indictment for lack of notice. Then, of course, at least here, it would be a conditional quash. Then the state would have an opportunity to amend and actually bring some details in so you can give notice to the citizen that's accused.
Do you think that's coming? Do you think that?
They're going to file a motion for quash. In Texas, we don't have a pre-trial motion for dismiss. If somebody is arrested but not indicted yet, in Texas, you're entitled to theoretically an examining trial where it's a probable cause assessment of whether there's enough evidence to even move forward. And if not, the case can be kicked out, but everybody gets, and once the case is indicted, then you're not entitled to an examining trial. So we don't have the equivalent of a motion to dismiss at this stage. For lack of speedy trial, yes, but that takes time. So a motion to quash in Texas would be appropriate at this time, but it can be remedied. You have an opportunity to remedy it. So it's quashing, it's not with prejudice, so it can come back. So, but New York is different. It's different. But theoretically, I want to go back to your first point, or a point you made. Theoretically, it shouldn't matter. Someone can say, like an Alan Dershowitz, who I still haven't heard why he's a liberal guy, quote unquote, and maybe he means he's a classical liberal. I don't know what his issues are and why he doesn't consider himself a libertarian or conservative, but it's a discussion on a side note. But here's a guy that didn't vote for Trump, allegedly. And I don't know if he's going to vote for him again. He seems like he says he won't vote for him again, no matter what. Fine. But he's still standing up for the rule of law because he believes in something greater than his opinions, greater than his feelings. He agrees on this concept of the blindfold, on this concept of justice for all, due process for all, fundamental fair play. And it's predicated on truth. It's predicated on a blindfold, on evidence, on standards of beyond a reasonable doubt, understanding probable cause to accuse, beyond a reasonable doubt to convict, and not wanting people's feelings to govern, because that's the king of the mountain mindset that we talk about. Because if it's about our feelings or it's about whoever's in charge can make the rules, then I'm going to do anything I can at all cost to be the rule maker. That's the problem.
Dershowitz has essentially categorized Merchan in those terms. I mean, he's categorizing him basically as an ideologue. Can you imagine? I think I actually give a pretty good example. Can you imagine you're in Manhattan, you're a guy like this guy, and you actually let Trump go, and then you got to get back to your family and your friends and your peers who think just like you, and you got to say, I'm the guy that let Trump go. So that's the standard?
Look, I'm going to give an example. I don't know if I should use her name. There was a judge who was a Republican on the civil side. And everybody agreed she was a great civil judge. I mean, I don't practice civil law particularly, so we were in front of her a lot. But everyone, Democrat lawyers, Republicans said this judge is great. She lost this last election, and they were upset about that. So because it doesn't matter what your label is on your party, they wanted her because she'll follow the law. And she'll be fair. She treats people professionally. She gives people opportunities. She's reasonable. She's approachable. That's what you want in a judge. Your ideas are your ideas. They should be separated. But when I was DA, I mean, I didn't make decisions that way. I mean, the law had to be followed. And anyone that worked with me will tell you that we made decisions based off of facts and evidence and the law and whether we could prove that to the standard that we were held as the government to follow. And we took that very, very serious. We listened. We were open. In the last minute, say, if you have evidence of exculpatory evidence, we're not going to take it and say, gotcha, thank you. Give it to us. If we need something to make a reassessment of our situation, then we'll do that. And so we can talk about this more.
Nico, you want to?
Well, no, I mean, we need to talk about the after show. We need to talk about Trump more on the after show. We're going to talk about the trans situation, the trans movement on the after show. Did you want to say something, George? Because I want to spend a moment talking about this weekend.
And I'll make it quick. Again, not about Trump. This is about everyone who's listening, about every American citizen. Look at your representatives right now in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Watch carefully. Those who are silent are dangerous individuals. They really, really are, politically. And you need to vote their asses out. Where the hell is Mitch McConnell? He's the head of a Senate. He hasn't said a damn thing about this. Mitch McConnell is not a conservative. He is not. He is aiding and abetting a political enemy here. This man is a big, big problem. And there are others like him in the Senate and the Congress. If you wanted a clear litmus test, it's this, because this affects every American. This is not about Trump. He's okay with this happening to Trump, but ultimately he's okay with this happening to you.
Yeah, well, that's true. I talked about this last week on the show, I think, and Salah made a little video about it. The weak person, the malicious person, get you the same result. the malicious person's trying to screw you over. The weak person isn't trying to screw you over, but they're so weak that they'll let the malicious person screw you over. The result, you get screwed over. But as we transition into the after show, whatever. But you know, there's a video. There was a picture going around on Facebook that someone sent me or on social media, and it's a picture of the buildings in April of 1956. To talk about Easter weekend, we call it Resurrection Weekend. I was at Good Friday service yesterday, and I'm going to be at Resurrection service tonight. But it's a big deal for Christians, and we'll talk about this on the after show too. If you're not a Christian, please just. But it was part of our fundamental foundation of this country. There's a picture, and I hope we can show it on the after show, Saulo, of New York City in April of 1956. And you have the Wall Tower, 60 Wall Tower, you have 20 Exchange Place, and you have the Citibank, and then 40 Wall Street buildings have crosses on it, celebrating what yesterday was Good Friday, about the idea of Christ sacrificing for our life and what that meant for this country. We'll talk about that more on the after show, guys. However you celebrate this weekend, whether you're a Christian and celebrate Resurrection Weekend or you're a family enjoying your family members, God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, we're on Facebook Live, you guys.
Thank you for telling me.
It's so funny because we got a question from Sid. Thank you, Sid, for always being here on the after show. But I feel the same way she does. She says, my question has been the same since Trump lost the presidential election to Biden. Everyone says the same thing. Make sure you vote. Well, we did vote, and they won. And how will we ever win if the other side keeps cheating? And I do feel like that sometimes.
Well, I'm always real careful about that. First of all, there hasn't been an official establishment of people cheating. I mean, I think
come on, Nico. I think
there's reason to look into. I think there's.
Yeah.
I have to I can't divorce myself from what I do.
Yes.
As a profession.
There have been people that have been arrested and they found guilty here and there. You're saying in terms of massive,
right? There's always been election interference. There's no doubt about that. It's just how is it gotten to the point to where it actually hasn't. Now look, I still have not seen that 2,000 Mule documentary.
You should watch it. Yeah,
I've heard it's good.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure, because I know people are people are probably having some anaphylactic shock to what you're saying right now. I want to just be surgical about it. You're saying it hasn't made its way through courts of law and found to be a result of mass fraud. Is that what you're saying?
There's cheating. Prove it to me.
Right.
What are you going to say? No, let's do it. Karen, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Let's just reason through it. Prove it.
There is no proof, and what?
Okay, and then you would be cut off right there. Done.
That's right.
Now,
I would say divine
there's
proof.
Instances.
Well, okay, and into what level of evidence?
Exactly
That's exactly
right.
all I'm saying is I'm not saying that there's not enough to question.
I get it.
I'm not saying that we need to really dig in. I'm not saying that this correlation is not causation. Look into.
I get
I'm not
it.
saying any of that. I'm just really trying to wear my objective legal analysis hat, my critical thinking hat, and I have to anticipate the counter argument. And you can say, well, there's this, and we'll show it. There's a movie, there's a documentary. I can show you another documentary. They're going to say something else. All I'm saying is there hasn't been an established set of cases or facts that overall can say there has been this national push or this national thing that actually affected the election.
But the thing that kills me is, yes, there's no proof.
Well, I'm sure there's no proof, but
enough proof to take
I should say established. Maybe it hasn't been.
But yet on the other side,
go ahead, please.
Been established.
I was going to speak to your proof.
No.
Can the people hear you?
No, I'm just saying there's a lot of other stuff that general people believe,
That's different.
but they don't allow it to come forward.
Do you believe in aliens?
No.
Okay, well, other people do.
Yeah.
Like Matt Walsh believes in aliens.
Really?
Matt Walsh is an alien believer. 100%. Now you are, huh? No, I'm just saying. And then prove it. Now you can say, well, this disc and this video is weird and this astronaut said this. Okay, great. But has there been an established country? That's all I'm saying.
No, but what I was thinking is, okay, there's not enough proof that has been brought forward to have a case against it, but there's no proof what Trump did is a felony, yet he's been indicted 34 times.
Yeah, I never use an argument like that. Well, well, what about what they did?
Well, no.
Yeah.
I get that, but they can bring up proof when they want the proof, but they don't care about the.
No, this is not a proof. This is an abuse. What Braggs is doing is an abuse of the system.
Yes.
There's no proof there. There's just not. There's statute of limitation issues.
Good point.
There's intent of him, and I think it's prosecutorial misconduct. The audacity of this guy. I'm saying for him to say we cannot normalize. I want to use his quote. We cannot normalize serious criminal conduct. Really, asshole?
Seriously? Yeah.
You're the guy that has reduced 52% of felonies in your borough to misdemeanors. And they've proven, and I don't know the percentage of this one, that's why I'm keeping my mouth shut on this part, that they've reoffended and hurt people and killed people. So you don't want to normalize serious criminal conduct? What's your to your point now, what's your definition of serious? What's your definition of criminal conduct? And if you don't think that we should normalize it, why are you reducing 52% of your felonies and why they're reoffending? See, nobody's pushing back on this guy because the media sucks. This is my point. I know we kind of gelled into a lot of things, Karen. Again, I'm not saying that our election laws don't need to be looked at. I'm not saying that there's some serious problems that appear to be there. I'm not saying that it didn't affect I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is when you have to think about the counter argument. If you're saying, give me the proof objectively and systematically as a whole that this affected the election, what would you say? That's all I'm saying.
I would say it's unfortunate that that's the case.
There are certain things that are irrefutable, though. Okay. What's irrefutable is that Trump lost in swing states.
Fair. That's true.
That's irrefutable. It's also irrefutable that in every single one of these states, including Pennsylvania, there was an overwhelming number of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots that came in overwhelmingly in favor of the Democratic candidate. Yes. That is also true. It is also true that the Republicans do not do that as a matter of electoral practice. We show up on election day and we vote. Okay, so that's all factual. There's no question about that. It is also factual that in every single one of those states, you had a trickle vote counting dynamic.
I agree with all
that. So
yeah.
You have election laws that have been traditionally upheld in the country, including in those states for decades, that
that were turned on their head under the ruse of well, if you get out there and you vote, you're going to die because COVID's going to get you. Okay, this is how it was all sort of positioned. This is a safety issue. And so you had Democrat lawyers preceding those elections in 2020 that had done a remarkable job, frankly, under the guidance of guys like Mark Elias, Elias, who was an election lawyer, among other things. And he was very effective. The guy's a skank, but he's unbelievably effective. And they did this for months and months. And it was very well done. And they pulled the rug out from Republicans. They simply did. Our Republican leaders just simply weren't on the stick. They weren't. And so what we had was election laws being changed at the midnight hour.
Yeah.
And we were really doing sort of circumventing legislatures, which is where the power to change election laws.
Some of those are more, to me, relevant than others. About Republicans not
I'm
doing
saying
things.
I'm not saying
That's just-
I agree with you.
that's a courage
I'm saying
issue.
it's a fact pattern.
I got it.
I'm not saying, and I agree with you that no one fact is enough to call it a smoking gun, an aha moment. It doesn't exist. Now, here's the other problem, Nico. There were a ton of lawsuits. And I would argue, unfortunately, that they were shittily constructed. They were. I mean, the Sidney Powell thing still pisses me off.
Oh, it
she
still
drives
makes
me
me
insane.
so
Every
mad.
time I think
Yeah.
about it, I get really irritated about it. Enough with bringing the Kraken already. How about bringing it once in a while? This is the problem. It never actually came. Now, you can argue, guys who are listening, you're saying, wait a minute, they had all of these cases, but I agree. They were never deliberated in a court of law.
That's all my point is, George.
It's
I get
exactly
it.
right. But we also share some of the blame for that because we didn't construct it. We should have foreseen that. I can't believe that after Trump went through the bullshit that he went through for 4 years, that we still didn't have, can I say it? We still have a fucking idea what enemy we're dealing with. How can we not know that? How can we not know the enemy that we're dealing with? That these people will go through any measure. We should have anticipated that. So I think Trump has it right. Trump going into 24 knows exactly who he's dealing with. Listen to what he's saying. Whatever mail-in balloting is legal in any one of these swing states, whatever absentee balloting is legal. Yes, they're different. But let's just put them together right now to make the larger point. He says we need to do that better than they do it.
But see, that's strategy. I mean, he's right.
Right.
I mean, that's
He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
We haven't done that. And so I think we need to do that because that's the reality that we have today. Once we get back in power, because you can't do anything without power. Unfortunately, you can't. Once you get back in power, then you can get back to sanity. That's right. You can use your power to come back to sanity. You can use your power to revest those powers, those laws back in the purview of the legislature, which, by the way, the legislature needs to grow a pair of balls and take that back, but they're not. We need leaders with courage, Nico, and with knowledge. But we got to get back into power so that we can make these changes. Sorry about the sermon.
No, but there's a lot there. But some of those, like I said, were strategic points you were making. Others were legal points. My point from the beginning was, if someone just says prove it, we can't. Look, I heard a commentator say this week, and I thought it was well said. Republicans and conservatives, people advocating need to finish their sentences. Was it Kellyanne Conway? I think she said it. Finish your sentence. You just can't say election laws, this, that, all these one word arguments. Finish it out. What do you mean by what you're saying? And then what's the solution? You can't just bitch about something. You got to have a plan to do something about it. If we're going to criticize the left or the progressives for bitching about stuff, well, then what's your solution? I mean, and then they're going to ram theirs down our throat, and we're not going to even stand for ours. We're just going to yell a word here and there. I mean, you can't do that. That's not an advocacy strategy.
That's right.
And so there's legal ways of doing things. They have to be followed. There's strategic ways. There's courage. We have to get the right candidates out there, and you just have to change hearts and minds. I mean, if you're going to say, I'm just going to play it in my pond and you play in your pond, they're trying to grow their pond. And we ain't doing shit to grow ours. So I don't understand what we're doing here. I like to engage in conversation. I like to talk to people and say, why do you believe what you believe? I'm always open-minded. I've shared with them my journey, how my ideas have developed as I've matured, of course, in my faith and in my experiences and then the things that have never changed. I've had people telling me, when did you get so conservative? I said, what are you talking about? I've always been the same. When I started running in 2009, there's not a position, social or legal or theological position I've changed. I'm not saying I haven't matured in those times. I'm just saying in a big ticket position, I haven't changed since 2009. And so I've just gotten even stronger in them now because I've seen them play out in this experiment called politics and life and things like that. We're not doing that. We're not being strategic enough. We're not trying to change hearts and minds. Because if we want to win on the voting election, yes, we have to have the rules of engagement. We have to have good voting laws. But until that happens, we have to have good strategy. Look, we didn't lose this overnight. There was a goal.
That's right.
There was a strategy, and they implemented it. They were playing long ball, like China's playing long ball. They have a 30-year, 100-year plan. We don't. We have a 30-minute plan.
Yeah.
And it's all emotional. And then once the emotion goes up, oh, shit, my emotions, my rah thing didn't work out. We had one little group. We prayed together. We did all this together. And, okay, didn't work. Okay, I'm going to go back. Or let's do the same thing again. Well, let's have another prayer group. And I'm a prayer guy. I pray every day, every single day. And I love people that have the gift of prayer, that they're prayer warriors. We have to pray and do something. David did not just pray to defeat Goliath, right? Jesus prayed in the garden, but then he hung on a cross, and then he rose from the grave that we're going to celebrate tomorrow. So there's action. Jesus says in Luke 6:46, why do you call me Lord, 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 and not do? We're supposed to do things as believers. And if you're not a Christian, but you're still a conservative, great, that's fine. But have a strategy of doing something. How are we implementing these ideas, and how are we persuading people? We got to get out there and persuade our young people.
What an excellent point.
We have to,
Yeah,
we just have to.
That really is the true measure of love. You can claim you love somebody all day long. Jesus says, if you love me,
do what I say.
Keep my commandments. I mean, it's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, lip speak is okay, but it can't stop there. Ray Rodriguez and James Warren, tying those in with Stephanie Thomas. Stephanie says, got to play their game, but do it better or it will never change. Okay, well, that's what the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. I'm going to say former President of the United States. No, we don't want to say former President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, right? Right.
Well,
but Trump would agree with you, and I think he's spot on. Ray Rodriguez says, "Have any of y'all?" Wrong one, Ray. Ray, thanks again for attending this program, for showing up on these comments and following this program. I really appreciate you, man. You said something really interesting. You said we need to return to same-day voting, no mail-in ballots, brother. That's never going to happen until we actually win elections. And we can actually persuade legislatures to take the power back that they frankly hold.
I don't think we should never have mail-in votes. I mean, look, we should just keep it the way it's always been. If you have someone that's older, sick, or they're serving our country, that was absentee voting. It was called absentee voting. It wasn't called mail-in. Of course, it's essentially a mail-in vote. I didn't mean to cut you off, George. I'm just saying, so I don't want to say no mail-in, no absentee voting. Okay,
and
again, we have to be careful.
I'm guessing that's not what Ray is suggesting, but I think you're right. I think it's important to clarify
I'm just reading
that.
what he's reading. That's
James Warren says, a lot of this the courts don't want to take up due to looking like the Supreme Court in 2000. You know, it's interesting. The courts will not take it up after the fact. I think they've made that clear. You can't get on the other side of an election and say they cheated. And here's the facts, and now we got to reverse the election, particularly if a state secretary of state has ratified those results. The time to fight is beforehand, and this is why the Democrats were so effective and brilliant. They did all this ahead of time. They laid the groundwork ahead of time. That's right. They changed things ahead of time. We have got to get into power so that then we can begin to change back to this system of same-day voting, although it'll never be strictly same-day voting. There are people who have legitimate reasons to not be able to attend in person. But I think that's the sequence of events. We have to fight proactively. It's never going to work. The courts are simply not. They've shown, even local, state, and federal courts, Nico, have shown that they don't want to touch election interference cases after the fact.
Yeah. Look, what I think is ironic about this, Karen, a little bit, is how, and look, we can have a discussion about how this is going to play out for Trump. I think he wins the nomination. I think he's eliminated. He's way ahead in the polls. If I was DeSantis, I wouldn't even run now. I just wouldn't even run. As much as I like him, I don't think he's ready for the national stage. And his interview with Piers Morgan really showed that to me. I'm just giving my opinion now, right? I'm entitled to it. And so, to me, I think that they're trying to play it too safe with him. He needs to play it the way he played it in Florida. He told a lot of people to F off in Florida. Whether he said it literally or figuratively, he did it. He was bold. He was in that arena. And he feels comfortable doing it. He was the bantering, the positions he took, the advocacy points he made. It's a whole different ball game. When you're a great swimmer in a lake, and then that lake or that river gets into the ocean, you're like, oh shit, just this is the ocean. I mean, have you ever swam in the ocean?
That is so
it is intimidating.
perfect.
If you've ever
analysis.
When you're in the ocean, you're like,
You're not in charge.
Jaws jacked me up. I mean, I was like, what the hell's under me? I don't want to. I've seen too many videos.
Just like that, you go from being chief predator
You're like
pray,
the river's
right?
this deep, the lake's this
The
deep.
minnow.
I know how deep it is. I know what's in this lake or river, in this ocean. I don't know what the
You
hell's
kind of
out
get the
there.
sense, I don't know if I belong here.
You start hearing the Jaws music, and so I got into a passionate. Me and another buddy of mine got into a passionate with two other buddies of ours. I mean, these people loathe Trump, and I said, it doesn't matter if you loathe Trump. What does it matter? I don't care. I mean, I don't care if I like him or like him anymore. Dislike him. He irritates the shit out of me.
immaterial.
I criticize him when it's appropriate. I compliment him when it's appropriate. I try to do my best. I do my best. I'm wrapped in flesh. I'm not perfect. One guy was perfect on this earth, and it wasn't Nico LaHood. And so, but I try to call balls and strikes. I try to call balls and strikes based off an ideology that's biblically based and logical. I can defend my positions. You know that, and I do often. And so, but who else can deal with this shit? I mean, just think about it. Who else can deal with this? I mean, it is insane. These candidates have no idea what they're up against.
That's
They
right.
really, and watching it, and I'm telling you, I've seen this, and I use fighting as an example. Someone that watches fights, or even coaches, or as a coaches fights, and as a trainer, it's different than being the fighter. You can watch 1,000 fights, and you get into one sparring match, and like, oh shit, that was weird. That was different. I mean, I teach blocking, I teach punching, but man, to actually have to execute it when someone's punching back at me, that's a different ballgame. This is my point. What is Trump going to do for this country? Period. End of story. We have an idea. It's not a guess anymore. I wasn't a Trump guy at the beginning. George knows
Way
this.
better than idea now. I mean,
We know for sure.
4
Yeah,
years.
we have 4 years exactly. But all I'm saying is this, and that this is not condoning his personality. This is like, okay, it's bigger than Trump. I encourage people to take on the Ted Cruz approach. Ted Cruz, I mean, look, it doesn't get any more personal when you attack your family, your daddy, things like that. And Ted Cruz says, okay, I'm going to shelf that for a moment. He can tell, and you know, I won't say it. I say it too much probably now. He can tell Trump to F off in private. He can say, you know, Trump, Donald, I don't appreciate the shit you pulled with me. You can go F yourself. Screw you and your bullshit hair. But this is not about you and your orange skin and your hair. This is about our country. And so I'm going to stand with you. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
We have to hate somebody. We don't think of anything greater than ourselves. We're not living for something greater than ourselves.
That's it.
This is something, it's not even about Trump. This is not about Trump. This is not about Alvin Bragg. It's about an ideology funneling this and pushing this. It's about what Trump represents, not who he is, because it's reprehensible. Got it. Did he bang a porn star? Probably. I don't know. It hasn't been established, once again, in a court of law. I mean, if you have to say reasonable suspicion, yeah, I think he probably banged her. But whatever, it doesn't matter to me. It's irrelevant. That's between him, Melania, and God. Can he repent? Can he be redeemed? Can he be forgiven? Absolutely, biblically and scripturally. But it's not about that either. This is something so much bigger than all of us and any one person.
Man, it's so awesome.
Got to keep that in mind.
Salo, we should make a reel of that. That's good advice. Send it over to DeSantis' office. I'm dead serious. This is
DeSantis.
good because you might think, well, he doesn't need you to give him advice. This is actually very important advice, and it's not confined to DeSantis. I think every single person who is running right now, who's scoring at an impressive 1% to 2%, should drop the hell out. Yeah. Just drop out. Stop wasting time and wasting money. And do what the Democrats do in reverse. The Democrats have an unbelievable ability to unify around stupidity and get things done. They really do. Why don't we unify around something worth unifying? Unify around Trump, because in so doing, you're not unifying around how he does his hair. You're not unifying around his particular choice of tanning lotion. That's not what you're unifying around. You're not even unifying around his 2:00 in the morning tweets about something that seems irrelevant, but then we find out years later is actually not irrelevant. You're not unifying all the things that irritate you. You're unifying actually around the American citizen, because Trump is at the tip of the spear right now. He personifies the misuse and the weaponization of the legal system against every single American. If they're actually successful in doing this against Trump, it is unquestionable that they'll be successful against you. I saw a comment earlier, and I'm trying to remember. Here we go. Brenda, how do you pronounce your last name? Not that you can call and explain it to us, but it's... is it Honjager? It's a good comment. You said we didn't lose it overnight and it takes time to fix it. Nico, she says we don't have that much time. What should we be doing? We kind of mentioned that on the radio a little bit. We believe that the war is ultimately being fought locally here. The grassroots war the culture war is being fought in the classroom. It's being fought in the American school district. That's why it didn't happen overnight. Yeah. These people think the way they think,
First of all, you got to
because they were taught to think that way every day in the American classroom. So it begins with the teacher. It goes to the principal. It goes to the superintendent. It goes to the school board.
It starts with the kids.
I think I mentioned letters to the editor off the top of my head, but yeah, at a local newspaper. I would even say your pastor. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever why you shouldn't talk to your pastor about enlisting prayerfully. Don't do it stupidly, but enlisting the church's resources or his voice, his time, and maybe coming alongside you. Perhaps the Board of Elders can hear your claim. Maybe they don't know that this is going on legally. This is ultimately a moral and Christian concern because the very rights that the church enjoys in this country from which it can preach the gospel are being eroded every day. And so I think you ought to prayerfully consider even taking it to your local church. Prayerfully, don't get in there in the middle of a service and start shouting. Ask for a meeting with your pastor. Ask for a meeting maybe with the Board of Elders. And then see how that goes.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I think it's a lot of things. Everything you said is obviously very practical. It starts with your kids, to me. It starts with if you're doing nothing, do something, right? Talk, make comments, get a group together, discuss prayerfully and thankfully and strategically think about how you can bring conversations up with people. Don't be afraid to get in a conversation because people are so risk averse.
They are.
We don't want to offend anybody. We're not trying to offend. Look, I'm going to say something. It is impossible, Karen. It is literally impossible to have a meaningful conversation with anybody without the risk of offending them. How can you do that? There's nothing meaningful about that. If we're going to give you platitudes, and I'm going to bullshit you, and we're going to talk about things that are nice, and I'm going to agree with you when I can, but then don't want to disagree with you, but I'll go out of my way to find something to agree with you on. That's not a meaningful conversation. A meaningful conversation challenges you.
I was just going to say, you could have a conversation where you agree with whatever everybody says.
That's right.
That's not very meaningful.
It's not. George and I challenge each other. I mean, and to our
lot actually.
Yeah, a lot, and even more so than that one the time on. And that's why. And not to bring this back up, but that's why that one time, and people might not remember this when that Frank Rodriguez situation came up. Why I was so passionate. We've got to take ground. Here's a guy who advocates and lives the homosexual lifestyle, but he was at the school board railing against it. He said the only flag. That flag and the LGBT flag should not be. That is a sexualized symbol. He's saying this, not Nico, George, Karen, nobody. He's saying it. Frank, they had him on Patrick Value Entertainment. I don't know if you know that, Saulo. I mean, he's gotten some ground. Good for him. And he says the only flag that should be in a classroom should be the American flag. That flag doesn't represent me. The American flag. This is Frank Rodriguez saying this. Why wouldn't anybody embrace? But then you'll get some dumb dicks out there that says, "Oh, well, but he's living this lifestyle, and he's probably not a Christian, and he's not a conservative."
That's you.
I don't know.
That's not where I stopped.
But all I'm saying is, we got to say stop. Let's take some ground. We got to take some ground, and advocate that, Frank. That's why I'm so supportive. But I disagree with Bill Maher. I would love to be on Bill Maher's show. Get me on Bill Maher's show, get me on Joe Rogan's show, get me on Russell Brand's show, get me on Dave Rubin's show,
I'd love that.
Patrick Bet-David. Because these are good conversations. Patrick Bet-David, I really like his conversations, and he brings in people he disagree with, like Bill does, but from more of a conservative. Bill's and libertarian. Bill's more of the classical liberal. But they both exhibit and give us an example of what it's like to have meaningful, passionate conversations, but do it in a way that's productive.
I think you're right. I think they make a real effort in impartiality. They do.
You have to.
And it's a discipline. It's very easy to operate out of blind spots. I mean, I have a problem with that. I struggle with it. You get inculcated in the way of thinking, and it's very easy to just kind of operate of that in default mode. You really have to develop a discipline to say, am I considering the counter argument?
Yeah.
Am I really? Like we mentioned that at the very end of the program on the radio, we mentioned that picture that you showed from 1956
April, yeah.
and how there's crosses. And I said,
Can
I guarantee
you show it, Saulo, real quick?
I guarantee you there's people out there who are
saying?
thinking, yeah, that was right around the time that African Americans. I don't like to use the term African American. I don't like that because
You're an African American.
It's an inherent. I am. It's an inherently divisive term. Okay, you're an American. Period. End of story. I don't give a shit what your ethnicity is. It's interesting, but I don't think it's an important qualifier.
Right.
You're an American or you're not. Period. End of story. And so I happen to be white European ethnically. So I'll say a black American or a white American. If we have to go there, I don't even like doing that. I don't give a crap what your color is. But I know that there were people thinking, yeah, I think that's right around the time Black Americans were experiencing lots of segregation, and they were being, there were examples of lynching.
Are you showing it?
Right.
Okay.
Emmett Till, for instance, was just lynched about a year before in 1955. So yeah, thanks for the crosses, but I don't know that I want to go back to that world. Okay, two things can be true. What Nico is saying is the nation as a whole espoused to a set of ideals while at the same time falling short of them. We got to be honest about that. Okay, you got to be able to think through this kind of stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna emphasize a strength to the point where it becomes a weakness, and you're going to blow off a weakness altogether. So let's just have a salient conversation about this. Both things are true.
That's
right.
Spot on.
Both
George.
things true at the same time.
But then to add to that, you don't judge an ideal by its abuse. So keep that separate. When people say, "Well, you look at this Christian, you're a Christian nation." Look what. First of all, no one. There were people advocating Christian principles and then doing horrific things from it. I got that, but that's not the ideals of Christianity. So whenever somebody of a different ideology does something, that doesn't represent the trans movement. Look, there was a transgender woman that murdered those kids in Nashville. That represents the trans movement. Okay, so you don't want me to judge an ideology by its abuse. Fair enough. But you're advocating violence. Have you seen these videos in these capitals? Look at their eyes. Check out their body language, their facial expressions. All of that would be quite. You know how many badasses there are in this country? There's some badass dudes out there and women out there that if they really wanted to could smash this stuff. What are you going to do? Is that going to be our standard? Which I do not advocate, by the way. I'm just telling you. Is that the standard they're setting? Be careful the world you help create. What? Because someday you may have to live in it. Is that the standard? So then this person has to get their troops together. This person has to get their, what's that called? That's called tribalism. I don't want that for my kids, man. I like that picture that we showed. Because I love what George said. It's a set of ideals, although we fell short. We have Christ as our example for Christians, or even for this. Christ as our example, although we're falling short. And we're constantly trying to sanctify ourselves. During that period of time, there was an ideal that this country was aiming for. And we were being sanctified in the process. That means we were sobering ourselves up from ourselves, from our flesh. And that's a process. It's not a light switch.
Well said. And no one, not as well said as Martin Luther King, but close.
Oh, man. No, not even close.
7 years later, in 1963 in March, Martin Luther King actually made that case in Washington. He said he actually went through the ideals upon which the American Republic, and yes, it's an American Republic, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says we are a constitutional republic. Thank God we're not a democracy. Majority does not rule. Majority mob, anyway, doesn't rule. So he made a great case. He said, hey, this is what America stands for, and we're falling short of those ideals. These are the kind of arguments we need to continually have. Brenda came back to us and said, yeah, but I'm 68 and I don't have any kids in school, and put a period at the end of that sentence. But Brenda, surely there are people around that you can support who are in that fight.
Sure,
who will really appreciate it. If you can't fund them, and support them financially, then you can fund them with moral support. There's a lot of local efforts, and please give us your contact information because we can provide you some efforts that are going on right now. I don't know if you're a churchgoer, but perhaps that's a way to get involved as well. But there are things that you can do even though you don't have kids in school. But anyway, thank you for showing up today and making comments.
I wanted to bring up the term "go woke, go broke," because a lot of people say, okay, since Bud Light put a trans on their can, or had, Nike hired this actor also to promote sports bras, which doesn't even make sense. It's a silent way to say, I don't support you, but is that enough to just not buy somebody's products?
It really is a good question.
So what do you...
Is it true, first of all?
Well, it depends. I think it has been true. I think it can be true.
People got mad with Disney for doing the same thing.
And it affected their stocks. Mm-hmm. So look, and then they course corrected. Look, money's for these corporations. Corporations need to stay in their lane. You want to talk about staying in your lane? Just do what you say you're going to do. That's Disney. Just be Disney. Now that says, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Now it says, welcome all. They take out that I would never. Our kids want to go to Disney. I told my wife we're not going to Disney. I'm not going to spend a dime on Disney. I'm not. And they used to put on a great show. We did the Disney cruise. I can't, in my heart, I can't. I just can't. And our son, who's on the spectrum of autism, Michael, he says this one show that they do, this one Disney thing, and he's like, gosh, he really wants to go. And I was like, baby, I got to pray about it. I can't do it. It's hard for me and I want to do anything for my son to bring him some joy. Trust me. And we're in that battle every single day with his sensory stuff and what goes on and what gives him some joy and gives him a reprieve from what he deals with. And I have to prayerfully consider that. But all that to say is, yes, we should vote with our dollars. I don't drink beer, but I hope people don't support Bush. I really hope that they feel that. I can't stand. I haven't liked Nike for a while. I won't even. If someone gives me a Nike thing, I say, man, either give
You mean
me
Anheuser-Busch?
What did I say?
You said
Yeah.
support Bush. I don't know.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yes.
See, I'm not a drinker.
It's
Thank
okay.
you for correcting that. Yeah,
That's okay.
okay.
That's right.
Anheuser-Busch.
Just
Thank
to,
you.
Just to be clear, because
Yeah.
No,
there are
it's
many
good.
because they
Bushes
agree
in
with
politics.
both. They agree with both. They don't
No,
want to support
but that's a fair- thank you,
Anheuser-Busch
though.
and the other Bush too. So that's
And Anheuser-Busch. Thank you though. But what I'm saying is we have to. People should do that, but it's more than that. It's advocacy. It's getting involved in the voting process. It's training up children. It's talking to teachers. It's encouraging other parents. Sometimes people just need a Barnabas. They just need a Barnabas. They just need an encourager. Encourage them. If someone's in the fight, encourage them. And support people. Take your time. Don't say it's not my job. It's somebody else's, whatever. No, it's all of ours. It's going to continue to grow. Look at how this, George, we've talked about this. Look how this has expanded. Look at this push, this transgender cultish push.
Yep.
Look at this. And it's literally being thrusted on our children. And schools that are cowardice about this, I have zero tolerance to this. I don't. Zero tolerance to deception. That's what I'm saying.
But why? But why has it grown though? And I know we've talked about it's institutionalized.
You want them to think about it, or you want the answer from all of us? And Karen?
I want us to talk about it. I'd like to get your thoughts on it because we talked about teachers are pushing this in schools, and it's also now getting this institutional push. But that's sort of the tail wagging the dog. Where is this coming from? We have a federal government with a weaponized Department of Defense, and I can't blame these institutions for sitting there and saying, when the shit hits the fan, I'm going to be with them. Mm. That's what this is about. This happens this happens before. Really, listen carefully. This happens before societies go full-blown communist. Mm. This always happens. Always happens. You don't think this happens? And I know that Nazi Germany technically was not communism, but they're different heads of the same beast. It's authoritarian, it's totalitarian in nature. I get it. So this always happens. It happened in Russia. It happened in Nazi Germany. It happened in Venezuela. This happens. Okay. And so what you're going to see is the mom and pop stores. It's been happening for a while as a result of exportation of jobs, but it's happening even more now for political reasons. You're going to see the mom and pop stores, the smaller banks dissipating. You're going to see them disappear. And what you're going to see is a handful of power players in every major sort of economic sector. Okay. The big companies. Anheuser-Busch is no small fry. Disney, yeah, you're right. They got swatted. Yeah. They crawled under their rock, but Bob Iger's back, and he's pushing back on Florida, and he's saying DeSantis is wrong for Florida. So I don't know what they're doing, but they seem to be coming back on the attack. And I don't know. I'm not persuaded that they've changed any of their programming. There are major sort of too big to fail corporations, and they will align themselves. Major corporations trading big time on Wall Street are going to align themselves with power. This isn't shareholder capitalism anymore. Remember that conversation about the World Economic Forum? Yeah. This is stakeholder capitalism, and those individuals are the stakeholders. This is why did Anheuser-Busch come back and say, actually, what was the word? Scold.
Yes.
They scolded investors for having an issue with them using a delusional white male who pretends he's a female to advertise their beer. And they scolded you for that. The problem's you. You've got a problem because what have they done? They've waged their bet, and it's not in favor of you. They said, we're going to go with the government. That's where the money's going to come from.
This is the battle of fortitude.
This is crony capitalism.
This is the battle of fortitude. I mean, when George likes when I bring this example up, when I tell clients all the time, well, can they do that? Whoever the they is, whether it's
we've asked that too many times.
I've asked him that like 50 times.
Yeah, whether it's the opposing
answer.
counsel.
At some point, I'm
well,
like, okay,
if it's the
I'm not going to
opposing
ask you
counsel,
anymore.
whether it's the government, well, can they do that? Well, are you going to do anything about it? Well, no. Then yeah, they can do it. I mean, so, and then you combine that with whatever, I say this about the church, but it applies to parents and society.
It sure does.
Whatever
Yeah.
the church avoids, the enemy invades. We've avoided conversations. We've avoided being strategic. We've avoided we've avoided discomfort because we want comfort. We're addicted to comfort. Well, then yes, the answer is yes. And then when we do something, then there's a group of people out there. And I'm just trying to be objective in analysis because people ask us our opinions often. Don't just do something to do something. It's good, I guess, but it's either going to push people back in their corners or their side. Be strategic, reconvene. If you have a plan of attack and you're in the battlefield in a war, a general doesn't say, "Hey, this didn't work. Well, let's just do it again." They're saying, "Hey, let's retreat a little bit. Let's regroup and let's try something different." You have to regroup and rethink. And same thing with sports. Same thing with a fight in a combat sports, whatever it is. If you're doing something that's not working, you don't just do something because you're doing it. You got to do something different. Your jab's not working. You got to do a hook or a cross or something else. So we have to be very strategic. We have to check our courage, our gut. It's got to be a gut check, your fortitude. And we have to start winning hearts and minds and agree with people when we can agree with them. You have to do that. That's why the Frank Rodriguez example. That's why Bill Maher. That's why these situations. Look, let's agree on this, and then I'll give you an example. And Robert Kennedy supposedly is announced, and we got to talk about that maybe briefly or next week. In the
I'm glad he's running.
I am too. I like Bobby. I know Bobby. I know him, and we can talk about that next show or whatever.
He's going to raise some really important things. I don't think
he's fearless. Bobby is fearless. He is not. He won't win, in my opinion, because he's not a progressive.
Right.
I don't think he's a progressive. He's a classical.
He's not crazy
liberal.
enough.
Yeah, but he's fearless, and he'll challenge questions. But I was up with Bobby and some other people, Dale Bigtree and some other folks up in D.C. years ago, to educate people on potential vaccine injuries and things of that nature. And there was a guy named Tony Muhammad up there with me from the Nation. I think he was Islam. Well, he was from Farrakhan's group.
Nation of Islam.
Okay, there you go. That guy was a gentleman. He was professional. He was charming. I just enjoyed his company. I enjoyed his fellowship. And we were advocating because his advocacy from that group was that vaccine injuries occur more in black communities than in other communities because of the biological makeup and testosterone levels of the boys and in the males. That was their point. And there's some data to support that. But we were advocating on a point. Now, me and Tony might disagree on a lot of other things, I'm sure. And I hope we would take that same professionalism and courtesy and gentlemanship and fellowship and to disagree appropriately, right? But we agreed on that issue. We've got to start doing that. This whole tribalism, like, oh, you're a rhino and you're this. And Republicans irritate the shit out of me sometimes. We can say, look, I disagree with you on this. I agree with you on this. Let's disagree the right way. Because if you disagree the wrong way, you're never going to be on each other's side on the right way. You're going to just start alienating people. I'm not saying compromise our values. George and I do not compromise our values. We try to persuade others that our value is logically consistent and it doesn't violate the law of non-contradiction. Everybody has to explain the same way and follow the same advocacy points, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So we've got to be strategic. We've got to have perseverance, right? James 1, 2 through 4. We have to persevere through this. And it's not going to be easy. You just got to understand it's not going to be easy. And you're going to take some shit. There's a UFC fight tonight. I guarantee you the coaches in the ring, our trainers, are not saying, hey, George, you're going to fight for the championship tonight. You're not going to get hit one time. You're not going to get cut. I can't guarantee you. You're going to get injured. You might hurt your shoulder, your arm, or whatever. But do you want to win this fight? I do. You've trained for it. You know what you know. You've studied your opponent. Now go out there and execute. Go out there and perform. That we have to have a fighter's mentality. We do.
Yeah.
And we don't. And we have to do it the right way. And we have to pray and do something. So our Christian brothers and sisters, if you're a prayer warrior, then pray. But pray and do something. Educate people.
Know your enemy.
That's right.
Right. Know what you're fighting for.
That's right.
Know what tools you have at your disposal, and know how to use them. Right. I mean, it's basically what it comes down to. And I would say that on every one of those descriptors, every one of those categories, we are falling woefully short as a GOP. And I wonder if we're falling woefully short. I guess I don't have to wonder. I think we're falling woefully short as a church. If you're a believer, if you're a Christian, I am, and I firmly believe that is a huge problem right now in the body of believers, is that we are biblically illiterate and we lack sufficient courage to project or communicate the few things that we believe correctly, unfortunately. Shall we wrap up on that?
Yeah, there's a lot, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot we could talk about.
Asked,
we could really...
Mark says, Nico, can you end the show with a prayer?
Sure. But I want to talk first. Yes, but and there's more to talk about the Bragg situation and the indictment against
I know.
President
I have a
Trump.
lot of questions about
There's
that.
more to talk about.
It's not going to go away. So
Yeah, there's more to
we'll
talk
have
about.
a lot
these
more to
other
say
issues
about
that are
that.
coming up. There's no doubt about that. But this weekend, and to show that video, I mean, look, this weekend represents for the Christian and for the nation a resurrection of the dead, right? If you're a non-believer, this you can still get the idea of that, the resurrection of the dead. For us as followers of Christ, we believe that yesterday had a profound effect on me. I shared this with the men's Bible study on Wednesday. We talked about this on R-Rated Christianity on Thursday. I've seen a lot of murder cases. I've dealt with a lot of death, unfortunately, in my career and personal life too. And when prosecuting a case or defending a case, sometimes the deceased, the victim, a lot of times you'll see video of them days and weeks before. And I can't help but think to myself when I look at those videos, man, they had no idea that they're just 7 days away from leaving this earth. And then you look at a video maybe from the day before, and within 24 hours, this person has no idea that they're leaving this earth. And then when you actually look at the video of the incident, in my mind, I'm thinking, guys, 21 minutes, they have no idea that they're transitioning to the afterlife. And so I think that, so for me as a Christian, this Holy Week, Passion Week, you can call it either way you want, the passion that Christ showed for us. And Jesus, is what George and I advocate, is a historical figure. He's a first century Jew that even an atheist will agree walked this earth and did some pretty amazing things, made some amazing claims, but then backed them up by doing some amazing things. And the ultimate amazing thing he did was raised from the dead. He was brutally murdered by Romans, and they were good at murdering people. And so Good Friday to me was profound. It has a profound effect on me. It's equivalent to me, even more important to me, and whether you believe it or not, than when my brother's murder on August 15th, 1996. I often go through the same exercise on the 13th, and what was Mike doing? What did we do on the 14th? On the day of? I go through that exercise in my mind back in 1996. I do the same thing when it comes to Passion Week and Holy Week and Good Friday. So yesterday we celebrated the cross. Everybody, whether you're a Christian or not, looks for 4 absolutes in their life, in this world: evil, love, forgiveness, and justice. We all want absolutes. What is the definition of evil? Because I want to know so I can either fight against it or avoid it. What's the definition of love? What does it mean to forgive, and why should we forgive? How does that look? And then justice. No justice, no peace. We all advocate that, but what does justice mean to people? Everybody has a different opinion of justice. Well, objectively, where did all 4 of those things converge at one moment in time? The absolute evil was taken care of. The absolute expression of love was exhibited. Absolute forgiveness was offered. And justice was had, because a perfect law was given and a perfect law was broken, so a perfect sacrifice had to be given and paid for the redemption of all mankind. Everybody, not any just select group, everybody. And so that's what Good Friday meant to me and my family. We talked about that with our kids, and we celebrated that in a service. And then either today or tomorrow morning, we're going to celebrate the resurrection. George and I, along with other scholars, Gary Habermas and Michael Lincoln and whatever, there's other scholars out there and apologists that can defend the objective truth that Christ rose from the grave. That first century Jew that they brutally murdered, it was unrecognizable. They had followers, people of the way. They weren't called Christians early on. That scattered like cowards. And I'm fascinated by the discussion we had about Peter in our men's Bible study. And he's always following forward, but he kept following, and he's battling his doubts and all this other stuff. So practical. But then there was an empty tomb. And they knew the importance. The Romans, the political leaders of the time, and the religious leaders of the time knew the importance of finding that body. Find that body. We have to find that body. And nobody found the body. And then you had a bunch of people that acted like they saw that body rose. Because they were cowards before, something happened, and then they offered their lives in a brutal, brutal way. And then we have this movement that we still talk about today. Today, 2,000 plus years later, we're talking about that first century Jew. I believe that first century Jew was God incarnate. I believe that he actually died on the cross, because we know historically he did. And there's non-biblical sources from Josephus to Phlegon to Suetonius and all this, that we can go through all the apologetics on that. But then we believe he rose from the dead, and we believe it's a historical fact that he rose from the dead, that the grave was empty, the tomb was empty, the body was never seen dead again. It was actually seen alive, and because people saw that body alive, there was true transformation. There was true Romans 12:2, a renewed mind. And when you have a renewed mind, which is what this country needs, you have renewed behavior, and you have renewed living. That's what this represents to us. And because of that, George and Karen and Salwa and people in this room and other believers, we have hope. That means we trust God and we don't have all the facts. So when this world ends, and as you've heard me say before, there's one thing that through all this mess, everyone has in common. We're all leaving this earth. At some point, our heart's going to stop beating and our lungs are going to stop pumping. At some point, what do you believe happens at that moment? Well, I believe, George believes, you believe, many people believe, that we're going to stand before that first century Jew and we're going to give an account, and that's hopeful. No matter what happens on this bullshit world, that we're hopeful. But until we're pulled out of this bullshit world, or God comes back, or Christ comes back to this world, we're supposed to fight the good fight of faith, persuade others, Matthew 28:19, to go into all nations, trying to make disciples of all men, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. We have to know what he commanded. You have to be persuaded by that first, because then you won't take the punches if you're not persuaded by that. And then go out there and try to persuade others, and love them the way Christ loved. Stand for what he stand for, love what he loved, hate what he hated, and he hates evil and deception. That's the only thing he hates, by the way. And live a life that way. And that's what this weekend represents for us, George, as followers of Jesus Christ. It's a profound week for us as for Christians. It's a shame that we've lost that meaning, that foundation. I mean, this is all even for the Bill Maher's of the world and the Sam Harris of the world, and Christians and atheists and agnostics and Islamic people. This ideology blesses all people, and our founding fathers believed that. And that's why they used that set of ideas to use.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And it changes you from the inside out. That's the power that Christ gives us. But there's a why behind all of that, isn't that? Romans 5:8-10. In this, God demonstrates his love. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's why. That's the deal. He reached out to us and then sacrificed himself for us. Talk about the most inclusive message the world over, isn't it really? Yeah. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever, there's the inclusivity part, right? Whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Love that. Yeah. That's true inclusivity. Yeah.
Enjoy the weekend with your family, however you celebrate. Well, let's pray out, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity just to talk about you, and we pray for a revival in this country. It's a true revival. I mean, a change of hearts and minds. Romans 12:2, that people just say, man, you know, God, you make sense. You make sense. I believe in you. I'm persuaded by your truth. John 14:6 says that you are the way, the truth, and the life. We don't look at it that way. No one gets to our daddy but through you. And so I pray that this country sees that. I pray courage over churches. We're called to pray for people in leadership. We pray for President Biden and Vice President Harris, for Democrats and Republicans in Congress and the Senate, that people realize and wake up and say, we have to rally around truth. Truth needs to matter. Foundation of this country needs to matter. Let's go back to the basics of this country. And Psalm 33 says, blessed is the nation whose God is you. And you used to have a foundational hold on this country, and that's why we put it on our money. In God we trust, not in government, not in an individual, not in any political person, in any political party, but in you. These inalienable rights that you, our creator, you gave us in this country, that government didn't give us and take away. So we pray for that as we celebrate the beautiful cross. It was brutal and beautiful at the same time. It's amazing how you do that. Brutal murder that you put up with for us. Historically, we know that. But beautiful resurrection we celebrate tomorrow morning. And because of that beautiful resurrection, after the brutal murder, we have hope in you and salvation. And so I pray for this country. I pray for unity in this country. I pray for logic and common sense and truth to prevail. We love you, Lord. We celebrate you this weekend as we should every day. And we thank you for loving us when we're not lovable. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Blessed weekend, guys.